Hi guys, and welcome back to another Apex Racing Academy setup tutorial. It's Alex Simpson and we are in the Porsche 911 GT3 Cup car. This is part two of the two-part video about how to set this car up. And yeah, if you are an Apex Racing Academy member watching this on our Discord, thank you very much for subscribing. And if you are an iRacing member watching this on the iRacing forum, thank you very much for taking an interest. If you've got any questions about anything that I say in this video today, please post in your respective communities. Our coach, Kevin Ellis Jr., perhaps myself, will try and come back to you as quickly as possible in terms of answering any questions you have. Of course, please note that some of the sort of more complicated questions are kind of reserved for our academy members. And but yeah, any of the basic ones there, we'll try and help out as best as we can. Right, let's jump straight into this then. We'll start off with our in-car dials, exactly what they do within there, and we only really have with this Porsche Cup car is the brake pressure bias to adjust. And I think most people know what the brake bias will do, and how you can use that to fine tune. And I have to say, if you have got an academy setup, or if you've got any setup from a mate or anything, anywhere on the iRacing forum as well, this is the one setting you have to play with as a driver. No driver breaks the same. No one has no one has the same kind of inputs, pedals. You've got load cells, you've got pedometers, you've got some with damping, different shocks, and all sorts of that, different springs. There are so many different brakes out there. So to adjust this is one of the most key things to do. So don't just take a set and run with it and just go, I'll blindly stick with that. If you feel a little niggle with the brakes, then get changing, because everybody is different. I myself run a lot further bias forward than most of my teammates just because of the way I brake. Yeah, it probably says something about my braking technique, but hey ho, with some adjustments to the brake, the car is just as balanced for them, and I'm basically matching lap times, or in some cars, are better than. Okay, I'll give myself a plug. Um, but yeah, so as an example, if, for example, you jump in the car, you get the set, in some of the heavy braking zones, the back end feels like it wants to swap ends or is very squirrely, then typically this will mean that the brake bias is a little bit too far backwards. And you will need to move it forward. So above 50% genuinely is forwards. I don't think I've come across a car where it's the other way around on iRacing, but that's kind of like the way. So keep going to the right, or above 50%. With or if the opposite is true, so for example, you're coming into corners, perhaps more medium speed corners, for example, and you're braking and the car just won't rotate. It just feels like it's plowing through some of these sort of medium braking zones. Then what that might actually mean is that all the braking is being done on the front. If it just there's no movement on the rear at all, it just carries on going straight, then it may be that all the stopping force is going through the front end of the car, and then you'll just need to drop it back a little bit just to try and even it up. What what's happening in those two circumstances, for example? If the brake bias is too far forward, all the load goes on the front of the car to get it to stop. And you're overheating the front of the tires. And then when you start to come off the brakes and you need the car to turn in, you've lost grip because you've just superheated the fronts. The rears aren't anywhere near as hot. And so the rear actually has more grip. So you're shifting the balance much more towards the rear. So that's why you have that understeer effect. So what we're trying to do is trying to keep the balance in check for each corner. And that's why you see some drivers will move the brake bias for specific corners and things like that, just to try and keep the balance in check for a certain corner. Now, the opposite can be true. If we're leaning much more on the rear brakes so that the rear tires are stopping the car more than the front, then the rears get kind of superheated. That will then shift the balance more towards the front of the car. That's why sometimes we can even lock these rears up, and that's why we'll spin out. But that's typically why then, as we start to turn into the corners, the car feels really light on the rear end. This is more noticeable on, say, your front wheel drive cars, um, as well, because we don't even have any engine braking on the rear of the car. So front wheel drive will be far more noticeable that the rear end is all tail happy going into some corners with heavy braking. So yeah, to keep that in mind, that's kind of what's happening there. So we're shifting the balance front and back, depending on where the bias is and our own personal braking techniques. Right. Let's take a quick look at the front ARBs and the toe-ins and crossweight as well. So your anti-roll bars, you basically got a stiffness, so that you always have the same bar with this Porsche car. You can just change the blades, which is effectively what connects the bar, or connects it to the chassis. Um, and they have like a different stiffness setting. So the one is your softest setting. So this gives you sort of more movement, so the bar will allow the car to roll a little bit more. And 7 is your stiffest setting, and that will obviously try and restrict your movement. So how this affects the car. So your anti-roll bar can affect two things: the initial turn in and your mid-corner rotation. So if your car has understeer, for example, in the middle of the corner, then typically you'll find that your bar is perhaps a little bit too stiff. So if you drop it down, say if we were on the 7 and you drop it down to a 4, you'll find now that the car will have a little bit more grip. It allows the car just to sort of dig into the ground a little bit more, the tires to dig in a little bit more and generate a little bit more grip. So going down will help that mid-corner rotation. If you've got way too much rotation on the middle of the corner and you're sort of spinning out a little bit, then perhaps going up on the ARB will be the way to go. That will take off that little bit of an edge. I did mention that it can affect how the car transitions in and out of a corner as well. If you have a really soft bar, the car's going to be quite lazy. It's not going to be that responsive. So if you find that the car doesn't respond quite how you want it to do, then what you need to do is you need to go up on the front anti-roll bar. This will give it much more responsiveness in its behavior. If it's a bit too responsive, for example, say in high speed corners, more noticeable than any other, then and you're sort of almost losing the back end, then perhaps come down on the front bar, and that will just take that little edge, that initial turn-in edge off of the car and make it more sort of subtle and gradual, and will also give you a bit more mid-corner rotation. The toe in on the front, typically toe in is going to be fairly close to 0. The reason we kind of run 0 will be because anything sort of either way tends to affect the temperature of the tire on a long run. And what we don't want to do, especially with iRacing right now, is burn out our tires. So we're going to be playing somewhere in sort of around maybe, I don't know, a 2 to perhaps a 1.5, well, 1.9. There we go, kind of okay range. That will kind of give us sort of reasonable tire life by not overheating the tires. So just sort of note, anytime you move away from 0 is you're going to be basically reducing your long run pace. Now, what we have, you have the ability to fine tune. So if you go above positive, you are going to have a car that will have slightly less turn in. Sorry about that. Yeah, you have a car that have slightly less turn in as opposed to one that was at 0. So it won't, perhaps if you need a little bit less understeer in some corners on turn in, then that's the way to go. If you need a little bit more support on turn in, then perhaps you're in this 2 range here, or minus 1.7, something like that. That will give you a little bit more turn in. But like I say, don't just use the toe in as your go-to setting for dialing that, because it will affect your long run pace quite a bit. Crossweight, realistically, you just need to keep crossweight on 50%. If you have a crossweight that's not 50%, then that will typically mean that some of your settings here are asymmetrical. And when you have a car that's asymmetrical, what it's going to do is the turn in is going to be um, it is going to be different depending on the type of corners that you have. So um, just checking to see which way it is. So yeah, so a higher cross weight will give you more turn in on the sort of left hand um, sorry, no, this is the wrong way around. Sorry, yeah, I need to get this right. So yeah, for whatever reason, so if you're running a lower number here, lower than 50%, you're going to have more turning going on left-hand turns, but you're going to have less turning going on right-hand turns. So you have to, this is why you have to be careful, and you want to try and keep this crossweight 50-50 so that the balance of the car. Now, of course, some circuits have only one turn, like left-hander, like I'm thinking Glen Park. So you might not care too much if you have a car that has a slightly higher cross weight, and knowing all full well that it's going to be harder to turn on that left-hander than it is the right-hander, but it might turn a little bit easier on there. Typically, you really want to keep this 50% on road cars. You really are getting advanced levels of setup when you start to add a bit of cross weight in and things like that on purpose. Use that as a tool to notice that you've got the settings wrong somewhere else. You know, they're not in balance somewhere, and in which case you can fine tune that and get the car corrected. So use it as a warning. Right, let's talk about suspension then. We have a couple of things that we can really adjust in the suspension. We have ride height and we have spring perch offset. So we can't change the stiffness of the car. So we can't affect how it necessarily transitions in and out of a corner with the front suspension, but we can with the ride heights. So as well as a wing setting, we have a rake angle on the car that we can adjust. So let's just talk about adjusting the rake on the front. So a car will typically sit, obviously we've got like 117 and we've got 74 in terms of the ride height. So right now we've got a higher rear than we have a front. So we have this angle front and back, and then the wind will hit a car like this and it will push the front end down more than the rear of the car. Of course, we have a wing that can counter that and balance it back out. But typically, it's going to be hitting the bonnet and the splitter and pushing the front end down. So if we lower, there we go, if I actually do it the right way, if we lower this front end, we can't go any lower, typical. What we would do is we would increase our rake angle, and that would then give us more turning. So if we want more turning, we can affect the rake. Now, of course, the opposite is true, and we can raise the rear end and talk about the rake angle again. So what I will do is I'll actually increase this up, and we've actually raised our rear end slightly. That gives us a higher rake angle, and now the car will turn in. So if you ever have a setting that's not completely at its minimum level, say you get the setting and it's something like this at 80 mil, and you're like, I've just got a bit of understeer, and an aerodynamic change is going to help more in an aerodynamic heavy corner. So we're talking medium speed and high speed corners. So if you were like, do you know what, I'm just pushing in those corners, you have the ability just to come down a little bit on those settings, and you'll notice that you'll have an increased rake angle, and that will kind of help out there. If you find that your car is oversteering on those medium and high speed corners, maybe actually you need to reduce that rake angle so you can go up on the front, or you can go down on the rear end, and that will reduce the rake angle as well. While we're talking about aerodynamics, let's introduce the wing to it as well and make this the aero section. And then we will talk a little bit more about the suspension after that. Um, the wing setting is a way to kind of balance out our rake angles of the car. We can use rake in combination with the wing to kind of try and get the balance that we want. So let's take, obviously Spa's a good example that we're at now, but let's take Le Mans as the example. If we're ever running at Le Mans, we want the car to be as aerodynamic as possible. So what we want to do is we're going to run this wing. This wing obviously has lots of drag associated to it. So we don't want to have this huge wing pushing the car down, creating our balance in the corners so that we don't oversteer and understeer. So what we're going to do is we're going to reduce this wing to 1. That's going to allow us down those big straights to have the straight line speed that we need to do. But now we've got this rake angle on this car, this crazy high rake angle. Let me just reduce this down nice and minimum to the front. Oh, maybe I've gone too far. Yeah, I have. We've got this 116.8. Again, I'm uneven on the back, and you can see the crossweight was out there for a second, so that's kind of like the clue. So now we find that going into the chicanes and some of these corners, the car's really skittish because we've taken all the downforce off the back with the wing, shifting the balance forward. What we need to do is we need to balance out the car aerodynamically. So now what we're going to do is we're going to reduce the rear ride height of the car down considerably because we've taken a lot of wing off of it. So let's go down, say, to 111 millimeters. Now suddenly, because this rake angle is much less severe, we're not going to have as much turn in these corners and rotation through the aerodynamic corners. And that's how we can shift the balance back towards to the rear of the car with a one wing so that it's not crazy snappy and horrible. So if, for example, you find in the races that you're doing, say the coach might give you a setup with a 3 wing for, say, Monza or something like that, and you're still a bit slow compared to your rivals, and you think, I need this extra wing. But of course, going to a 2 shifts the balance of the car forwards, and you have more oversteer, too much oversteer, then you can come down on this ride height to get the balance back so you get the straight line speed you want while maintaining the balance of the car aerodynamically that the coach has given you. Right. I think that should kind of make sense in terms of what you want to do. Wing, of course, if you haven't got enough grip on the rear of the car, then one click of the wing can help that. The downforce is pushed on the rear of the car, so that will shift the balance more towards the rear. That would then give you a little bit of understeer. If you want more turning, shift the balance towards the front by coming down on the wing. That's kind of what that does. Right. So yeah, we really don't have too much else we can do in terms of the suspension of the car because we don't have any actual physical shocks to do. But we may be bottoming out in places. So we may have to adjust the ride heights based on actually physically the car bottoming out over curbs or something like that. And then be mindful that front changes you do will affect your rear rake angles or sort of the rake angle. So you might have to adjust the rear to match as well to keep the balance kind of in check. But one thing we can change on the rear suspension, obviously the cambers we touched in the last video, is toe-in as well. The toe-in, like the front, we're going to keep very, very close to 0. A more negative number will give the car more turn in. So coming down here will help the car turn in. And a more positive number will reduce the turn in. So if you are, for example, struggling because the car is over rotating on the way into a corner, then perhaps go up on your rear toe in. But if it's not turning in enough, then come down on your rear toe in. Fuel level is fuel level. Set that as you need. Be mindful when, if a coach gives you a setting with, I don't know, 60 liters or something like that, but you only need it for a 10-liter sprint race. when you take fuel out, it will raise the rear end of the car up. Let's just go down to that. We see it, we were on 110. Oh, typical. It's not changed it much. There you go. That's what you get for the Porsche being, mid and rear engine, and the fuel tank being in the front. So, yeah, what it's actually done is it has raised it tiny little bit, but it's more raised the front end of the car than anything. So, yeah, what we're effectively doing is we're going to, as the stint goes on, we are basically inducing understeer because the rake angle is less. So you have to be mindful of that. If you are doing a lot of your setup work with a full tank load, or at the start of the race, that's what the balance is going to be at the start. But maybe you want the balance to be a bit more fine tuned towards the end when the tires are wearing out. So if when you look at your tire wear rate, say your fronts are wearing out more than your rears, that's naturally going to shift the balance more towards the rear as the run goes anyway. And then you're going to do that again by reducing or by taking the ride height, rake angle, and adjusting it because you've gone up on the front. So you're going to have quite an understeery car. So keep that in mind. If you're struggling with understeer at the end, then perhaps you just need to dial in the rake a little bit more at the start of a run, knowing the car perhaps a tiny little bit sketchy for the first 3 or 4 laps until the fuel levels come down, and then you get more into your sort of sweet spot. So keep that in mind as the fuel burns, the car's going to change balance. All right, last thing to touch on then is the ARB blades at the back. Just the same as the front. The actual bar is always engaged, but we can change the stiffness of the blades. So a lower blade will give us more physical grip, but because it's on the rear of the car, we're effectively shifting the balance to the rear of the car. And what's then happening is that we're going to have less rotation. So we're going to induce more understeer by doing that. So more grip, but the balance shifts more towards the rear. So if you get a set that's on, say, a 4, shifting to the back, that will give you a little bit more understeer or take some of the oversteer off the car. If you want more rotation, you're going to have to come up on the ARB setting here. So this will give you less grip, shifting the balance back towards the front, giving you more rotation there. Okay, I think that is kind of everything. Short one with this 911 GT3 Cup car. Not so many settings to change. If you have any questions, let's say if you're an Academy member, post them on our Discord. We'll literally, anything you ask there, we'll try and help you out absolutely to the best we can. You can jump on the voice channels or into the hosted sessions, and we'll help you there and almost do some sort of one-to-one coaching with you in those sessions as well. But if you are on the iRacing forum, please do post, or in the description on the video, or in the comments on the video. We'll try and help you out the best we can. Always please note that, the real in-depth stuff is reserved for our Academy members, but we want to try and help the community out the best we can. Thanks very much for watching. I hope I haven't bored you too much, and I hope you found the video useful. Until the next one, I'll catch you later.